Wait But Why, and has the second most watched TED Talk of all time. And he is writing a lot about technology and its potential and how it, and especially also how, about society as well and how it interacts with technology. So Tim, maybe you can introduce us a bit to your current research agenda, what you're writing, what you're thinking about.
I was trying to pick a book topic, and I couldn't really decide, so I just decided to write about everything. So the topic is everything. That might be the title too. And the starts at the Big Bang and it ends at the end of the universe. And I go chronologically, and I get to the present about 2/3 of the way through, and the rest is about the future. So when you're writing about the past, you can consult the historians and the paleontologists and the archaeologists and the astronomers and the evolutionary biologists and everyone else. The future, you don't have that. So what you can do is, but you can interview people who really can see the present, and that's hard to do actually, because most of what we think we know about the present is actually kind of an understanding of conventional wisdom and common narratives about the present, which are, conventional wisdom lags behind. So it's always a little bit behind, and when you have a time that's moving so quickly, like right now, in so many different areas, the conventional wisdom is not correct. It's actually a reflection of the recent past. So to look at the real present, I went and I interviewed dozens of people in many different tech and science industries, and trying to just get a very big zoomed out picture of what's on the cutting edge right now, and talk to them about where they think things might be going, and then use that to try to paint a picture of what the future might look like. So I love coming to places like this, which is very efficiently full of lots of people who are right on the cutting edge, and it's been great talking to everyone here.
Yeah. And one thing you often highlight in your work is the role of exponentials and how we frequently underestimate exponentials of technology. So what do you think are some examples of what we've radically underestimated and what might we be underestimating now?
Yeah, well, there's a common quote about technology, which is that we usually overestimate the change in the next 2 years, but we underestimate the change in the next 10. And that is because when things curve upwards, it's we kind of just think in straight lines, even if we try not to. It's just natural. So we draw kind of a straight line, and that usually is a little bit higher than this part of the curve, and then it's a little lower because the exponential really gets cooking. I first wrote about AI in 2015, and a lot of the stuff I was writing about, this thing might completely change the world. We might be building something smarter than we are, like across the board. I mean, not even sure I believed what I was writing myself. I mean, I heard the predictions, but it mapped onto nothing that we saw. And if you looked, the people who believed that then, 2 years later, 2017, not that much had happened. AlphaGo had, shown that computers can beat humans at Go, and some other things had happened, but like transformer architecture was just being developed in 2017. But now, 10 years later, I think, if anything, it's farther along than almost anyone, even back then, thought it would be. So I think, same thing right now. When we look at AI, it's like maybe the predictions of 2027, 2028, maybe we'll end up disappointed by those. But 2035. I mean, when I talk to some of the tech people, and I ask them to predict, what do you think's what's the world gonna be like in 2050, 2075? And they would, a lot of them actually said, I refuse to predict anything past 2035 because that's an event horizon I can't see beyond. This concept of a singularity, which back in 2015 actually was kind of a little bit mocked as a term, a kind of a kooky Ray Kurzweil term, and but it's looking a little singularity-ish right now. And I think that's scary, but also like really promising. So many, I bet you if you went back to the year 1900 and talked to people about, human flight, people would have thought that's what kooky people think. Yes, many kooky scientists have tried, and no one's gotten, or engineers, and no one's gotten anywhere close. Humans will never fly. There was some quote in the New York Times right before the Wright brothers' flight, like months before, saying something like, humans won't fly for another 10 million years. They didn't even say a million, they said 10 million years, and it happened like 3 months later. So when something has never happened before, we are programmed the way our brains work, because this was true back when our brains were programmed, the world they were programmed for. When we notice that something's never happened, we say we think that it will never happen, and that people who predict it will are, oh, look how naive they are, they're making the same mistake. But actually, like, I think we could see in the next 2, 5, 10 years, like, realms of biotech that right now when you talk to people about, forget radical longevity, but just cancer, curing cancer, many people will say, they say that will never happen. They will believe that it will never get there. And I don't think that's true.
It's proven today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was inspiring. By the way, it's so super annoying to go after that guy. I'm like working on curing my own procrastination problem, and I'm failing at it, and he succeeded at curing his cancer. So.
But let's talk more about, you're very interested in life extension. Why is that? The idea that life is good and death is bad, isn't that something that most people disagree with?
Yeah, that's weird. I feel like it's crazy that like the burden of explaining myself consistently, again, not here, it's an exercise, but in the real world, I'm the weirdo who has to explain why I think like radical life extension is good. It's this, it's like they say that the most precious resource is time, and that you can't, it's the one thing you can't get back, and one thing you can't buy. Well, maybe with enough technology, we actually can buy more time. And I think that there's just a lot of, talking about, again, before flight, there was never anyone who flew. Well, there's never been anyone who's really radically extended their life. I mean, it's actually pretty depressing how you'd think with this many people, there'd be some crazy, there's crazy outliers in height. Someone's 9 foot tall, that's happened. Or plenty of other things. But no one lives past 120. I mean, 100 billion people have lived, and none of them. It's not like there's some outlier lives to 180, and we're trying to study them. No one. So there's some weird hard-coded thing going on, and because of that, the phrase is death and taxes. It's this inevitable thing. It's like the sky being blue. There's just nothing. This is not something that is doable. So therefore, we develop this kind of entire ideology, which I think some of the people in the longevity space call deathism. We developed this ideology, which I think is initially just like a coping ideology. I think a lot of the afterlife religions, I think a lot of this is a coping ideology for this very upsetting fact. And so, but deathism says death is a good thing. It's what gives life meaning. And anyone who tries to fight against this and extend lifespans is, first of all, they're hopeless. It's out of their mind. They're kooky scientists. They're not going to do anything. But also, it's not a good look. It's like they're a narcissist, and they're trying to play God, and they're trying to they can't they're not wise enough to see that just have come to terms with their own mortality. And again, I get it. In a world where our lifespans are pretty immovable. The problem is when you get to a moment in technology when, for the first time, you might be able to actually make some real progress there. Deathism is a huge impediment. It's an impediment to scientists that are trying to work on it have to kind of keep quiet about that. They won't get grants. They'll get mocked. And it doesn't make any sense. In the areas where we can do something like fighting cancer, everyone loves someone fighting cancer, saying you're so brave, good for you. Standing ovation for the person who's fighting cancer. No one says, oh, well, this person's 90. Why are they fighting cancer? They've lived long enough. They should accept their mortality. They're such a narcissist. No one would ever say that, and it would make sense to say that. But then that exact logic, when you apply it to radical life extension, which is just that, fighting cancer, but more broadly and more radically, all that logic just goes out the window and it's replaced by deathism. So I'm interested in A, because I'm a human who likes to be alive, and I have plenty of time to be dead later. I'm not worried about that. Like there's an eternity for that. So I would like to be around more. I kind of want to see what happens. I feel like I'm watching this incredible, movie of the human story. I don't want to like miss the end. I want to see more of the movie. And there's a lot of things I want to do. So I would like to live multiple centuries. I don't want to live forever. I actually don't think really, some people think they do. I don't think anyone wants to live forever. And I think one of the misconceptions also is that the radical life extension people, they want immortality. It's always the bad guy who wants life extension. It's Voldemort wants to live forever, while like good Harry understands that death is what gives life meaning. Death is embedded in our fiction and everything. And I think that really what it is it's just making lifespan voluntary. It's giving us the choice over what's more important than that. And people who don't want that, no one's going to force you to do any kind of treatment. You can have your normal lifespan and die in your 80s, and that's totally fine.
We'll give you our Make Death Optional sticker on the way out.
Thank you.
So with what you learned about AI and other technologies in terms of timelines and when there was hope and the exponentials, where do you think radical life extension is right now, and what does it need to get to the next stage?
I mean, look, I probably know less about the science than most of the people here, but I feel like we're somewhere before the Wright brothers' flight. We're in the stage where most people think it's impossible, and it feels to the people working in it like it's a long shot. I talked to a lot of biologists who called this the golden age of biology. They're working on CRISPR, they're working on epigenetic therapies, they're working on all kinds of amazing things, and they all have huge hopes about health span, about curing diseases, and but many of them said, radical life extension, that one is farther away. And maybe that's true, but to remember how exponentials work, I mean, something that is, if you go from I don't know, if something is we're 1/1,000,000th of the way there, and then we're with AI, you see something, something is moving, the AI is, the calculations per second is 1/1000,000th of the human brain, and then 1/1,000,000th of the rate of the human brain, and then it's, and then it's 1,000th. It still feels very far away, but actually, we're one step away. So I wouldn't surprise me if the general public, but also even people in this room, are surprised by some unbelievable breakthrough that really changes things in our lifetimes. I think there's one of the things that's promising is there are lots of approaches that I've come across interviewing people across lots of realms of biology. So on like the micro level, there's things like gene editing. The CRISPR is brand new. The epigenetic reprogramming, Yamanaka factors, is an early 2010s discovery that you can, kind of revert any cell to a stem cell. And now there's companies like Newlimit that are experimenting. Well, can we revert a heart cell, an old heart cell, instead of into a stem cell where it loses its identity, but can we turn it into a younger heart cell? There's bioelectric approaches. I know a lot of the people here probably know Mike Levin or know of his work, and trying to actually learn to speak the language of biology and be able to instruct biology on how to change itself. And then on the macro side, there's Justin Rebo and Jean Herbert and people working on organ replacement, and there's people working on thinking about uploading our minds. I mean, all of these are real long shots, but all you need is a breakthrough in one of these areas. I think of something like CRISPR or epigenetic cutting edge technology is a little bit like the transistor or the integrated circuit, where it's this kind of new platform that those came out in the 50s. You didn't see that much crazy progress in the 60s yet, and at least the average person didn't, or even the 70s. So sometimes these technologies come out, we may not just have scratched the surface with the actual real-world applications of these things. These are just brand new tools that we have. So it's hard to see any one of these things and say this is where it's going to happen. But I do feel optimistic based on all of the different realms that are all kind of entering a golden age.
Yeah. So what's our problem? What's wrong with society? So we see people like that do experiments in themselves, like a Brian Johnson, or billionaires and rich people in general, and they receive a lot of anger or hate, and you shouldn't do this. And technology in general is often, when you're the innovator, you feel like very lonely. People want to stop you or even outregulate you. There's many technologies that have been outregulated, like nuclear energy to a very large extent. So where is that coming from, and what is it? How can societies? What are the societies? How can we adapt to the kind of age and technology that we want to enter?
Yeah, well, so I mean, my last book was trying to figure out why our society, I mean, at least in the U.S. and a lot of the other Western countries, why it sucks right now. Like, why, I grew up thinking and looking at like the 40s and 50s and 60s and the civil rights movement and thinking, wow, we were so unwise back then and we're so much better now. Society just gets better and more morally, evolved and more just as time goes on, and that's not actually how it works at all. Wisdom is cyclical. There can be a leap forward, and then it can reach, a movement that was doing something good can reach kind of a decadent phase where it starts to kind of undermine its own progress. I look at something like the Salem witch trials or Nazi Germany, and you think, oh, those people in the past, they were so. And now, you start to, the last decade, I'm like, I understand. I said that is the same species that we are. Like our species is so capable of wisdom and goodness and incredible learning and insight and cooperation, which is why we have this incredible civilization that no other animals manage to pull off. But we're also capable of just like absolute, like just the most morally depraved, madness of crowds, kind of collective insanity that when we do really awful things or just really stupid or really self-defeating things. So I think that in the book, I wrote it because I noticed that I think we were going backwards in a lot of these areas. Mob rule was on the rise, and you saw stuff like cancel culture, and you saw so many political tribalism just ramped up, and suddenly friendships were falling apart, and people weren't speaking to their family members, and yet at the same it seemed like people were more politically engaged, but actually I think if you quiz the most politically engaged people on, a bunch of statistics about the stuff they supposedly care about, they would be off by, 100-fold on the things they cared about because they were swallowing narratives that were, propaganda much more than reality. So that's worrisome because as technology is moving faster and faster, and we're developing these godlike abilities that could do unbelievable things for us, or could be, could really, really be disastrous. We want to have our wits about us. We want to be our smartest selves. We want that, that productive collective capability to be thriving, not the mobbish, stupid capability. And it felt like we were going in the wrong direction for lots of potential reasons. It could be related to social media. It could be related to the legacy media becoming more tribal. It could be related to, we might see that with fear of AI. It could start driving people mad. So I think when you have a time like that, you're going to see you're going to see a lot of issues that need to be discussed with nuance and worked out together. You're going to see them instead fall to these kind of simplistic, opposing, tribal narratives. And that all thinking goes out the window, all collaboration goes out the window, and you just end up with two warring narratives, probably neither of which is really especially productive or accurate. And I think that one of the things you've seen in the last 10 years is kind of a souring of what I would, there's the tall poppy syndrome in lots of countries around the world, which is the concept that, the tall poppy in the field gets cut. So if you're successful, if you're wealthier than the average person, you better be quiet about that because people are going to not like you. They're going to try to tear you down. And that's, of course, that creates an incentive to not be that ambitious, to just stay with the crowd. The U.S. hasn't had that problem. That's part of what's made the U.S. great, is they don't, U.S. hasn't had a tall poppy syndrome nearly as much as other countries. If someone builds a unicorn in the U.S. and becomes a billionaire, traditionally, Americans say, good for them, awesome, good for you, big cheer. And that's been this great thing. And I do think in the last decade we've seen a little of that erode. And it's this idea that there's no such thing as a billionaire who's not evil, or that no one becomes a billionaire without it comes entirely at the expense of other people, and it's this negative thing. And that's the kind of it doesn't map onto reality. It's the kind of stupid narrative that just emerges from a really tribal time. So I think that's another thing, unfortunately, in the way of so many of the incredible things people like the scientists here and the AI tech people, the AI safety people. All these people are they're facing kind of culture war stupidity on top of all the challenges that they're already facing.
What is an idea lab, and how can you be one?
Okay, so I mean, I think what I've just discussed is kind of like the idea that we can collectively be wise, or we can collectively be smarter than any individual person. That's when we can discover all the stuff about the science and history and everything that no one human working alone could do. And we also can be collectively stupid. I think of this as kind of every human head has two minds in it. There's this primitive mind, which really is our survival software from 50,000 BC. And it is programmed to, above all, kind of think about what survival entailed in 50,000 BC. It was fitting in with the tribe, being high status within your tribe. So independent, rogue independent thinkers who challenged conventional wisdom and like to disagree, they didn't do very well. So the primitive mind has no interest in that, and it doesn't like people who do it. The primitive mind wants to conform, and it wants to force conformity on others, because that was solidarity, that was group safety. We all still have that brain, even though it really doesn't make much sense in today's world. It doesn't know we're in today's world. It's the same brain. It's the same part of our mind that sees a Skittles package and looks at the colors and eats the Skittles, even though it makes absolutely no sense. But that part of the brain thinks, oh, calories are hard to come by in 50,000 BC, so I better eat this dense fruit that I just found. So then there's also this higher mind that we have, and the higher mind can see in real time and is actually great at independent thinking and is brilliant at independent reasoning. And when it's around other people thinking that way, this collaborative possibility opens where the brains can connect together like neurons in a super brain, and amazing things can happen. So I noticed that we don't just go up and we don't just go between these two minds in our head. We do it in our groups. So if you have every group has a culture, which is culture is how we do things here. So a married couple has a culture, and so does a group of friends, and so does Infinitus City. All of these things have culture, and these cultures, we're all part of a bunch of different groups that each have a culture. And so within those cultures is an intellectual culture that I think can be kind of do thinking the primitive mind way or the higher mind way. So when a bunch of people with thinking with their higher mind kind of are built, develop a culture that encourages that. I call it an idea lab, playing on the idea that in that culture, people and ideas are treated as separate things, like scientists in a lab with their experiments. So if I put out an idea, other people will challenge it. They'll say, there's something wrong with your experiment, or I don't know if that works. And you won't get offended. You'll say, well, I think it's a strong one. Try to break it. And if you can break it, if the person breaks it, then you'd say, okay, wasn't that good a thing I built, actually. If they can't, you say, so I just can get a little more confidence in my idea, and that person now is going to update their idea and say, okay, we need to build on this thing. You see it. You sit around a dinner table that has this culture. It's full of disagreement and challenging each other and playing devil's advocate. And you can get in a heated argument without it being a fight. Everyone's still having fun. No one's mad at each other. And that's and it's a culture that values truth. So when you value truth, there's no idea that's sacred, because you know that truth is hard and disagreement is thought of as a useful and productive thing, and expressing unearned conviction. So someone who just really always is so sure of themselves, but you catch them a few times not knowing what they're talking about. People lose respect for you in an idea lab when you do that. And while saying I don't know and expressing humility makes you seem trustworthy and smart. So that's great. We love those. We love that culture, and I'm sure you're all part of some cultures like that. You also probably are part of what I would call an echo chamber culture, or we already have that term. And it's the culture when the primitive minds have taken over. And it's a culture where the group itself is defined by we all agree on these sacred ideas. And you'll go to a dinner party that's really politically charged. I've been to a few in San Francisco where the entire 3-hour dinner, if you actually just zoomed out and looked at it, the entire conversation is essentially different versions of saying, we are so right, we're the good people who are so right, how right are we, and how bad and wrong and dumb and evil are the bad people who disagree with us. And it's this really childish, just, embarrassing, kind of behavior, but adults across America are doing this right now. Politics makes people do it. Other sensitive topics, religion, nutrition can make people do this. There's certain topics where we all clearly agree on this, obviously, because we're good people. And so in that culture, if you try to disagree with the sacred idea, it's not going to go over well. You'll probably get in a heated argument that's not fun, and people will think of it as that guy was being an asshole. Let's not invite him back. People will start quietly talking about you behind your back, about how much you've changed and how, we don't know he's really become awful and blah, blah, blah. There's so much social pressure to conform and to agree. So I think it's just useful to have this framework in your head to notice when you're in an echo chamber, when you're in an idea lab, to try to encourage your echo chamber cultures to be more like idea labs, to try not to enforce. Sometimes you'll find yourself being the one enforcing it without realizing when you get too attached to a set of ideas. And doesn't mean you always have to be disagreeing. If there's a group that you love and they are just hopelessly in an echo chamber, okay, just don't talk about politics with them or just whatever. I mean, you don't have to always fight against it, but notice what it is. And I think what we want is more idea labs, because idea labs come up with new ideas. Idea labs are high, group collaborative thinking that produces insights and scientific discoveries and philosophical, discoveries, and it makes everyone in the group smarter. And unfortunately, over the last 10 years, I just think the ratio of echo chambers to idea labs has gone up, and I think that you see it on social media, you see this behavior, and cancel culture is is echo chamber culture asserting itself. And enacting a society-wide punishment on anyone who challenges a sacred narrative. That's when all group intelligence goes out the window, and we end up in a very unpleasant place.
So last question. We're here in Prospera with us in the Infinita Dome. What are your learnings and impressions from this, and where do you see this going?
I always was envious of the founders of the U.S. because they got to do something that's this fantasy, which is what if we could start our own country? What would we do? And the European countries, they had parliaments, they had figured out a bunch of modern things, but they also were laden with medieval baggage of all kinds, and it's really, really hard to these old habits die hard. And a fresh start, though, it's like, okay, let's take all the good things about those and all the new learnings of the Enlightenment, and let's build what should be with no baggage. And it was great. But, of course, today the U.S., has its own baggage that's hundreds of years old now. And unfortunately, the earth is saturated with sovereign states. You can't just go to a new piece of land and start a country very often. We're past that time. But when I see this, I just say, okay, that is how in today's world we can actually be continuing to do the what if I could start my own thing. And that can then be on, think about how many countries have now copied the US model or been influenced by it. Well, the same thing I think I see here is like this incredible thing where people can actually play out that fantasy, and from everything from clinical trial regulations to tax policy to immigration policy. I mean, everything can be rethought, and I think it's awesome. And so I'm super supportive of it. I'm going to write about it in my book, and I hope I'm rooting incredibly hard for you guys.
Thank you so much.